Hey, this is The Hard Truth with Tony Schaefer, powered by 6 Hour, Never Settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carry the best. I recommend you carry the best. The best is 6 Hour, Never Settle. We are on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud Podcast Network. Check us out, Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.net.com, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it now, Rumble, and all the other sites. And I think you all will enjoy our content because you're here watching us now. So without further ado, we're joined this week by Lord Conrad Black, the author of The Political and Strategic History of the World, Part 1, which I'm sure, no offense, is probably not as funny as Mel Brooks's History of the World, Part 1, but I think it's much more important. So Lord Black is known for his insightful and profound commentary, profound on political issues, and both. It's good to cover both, and has a certainty made history. And certainly, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. I've been up early. Has certainly had a former on history and on the direction of issues relating to politics because of his work through a number of medium. He was the former owner of the Telegraph in England. And the Jerusalem Post in Israel. He's also been friends and associates with President Nixon, Reagan. I'm a big Reagan guy because I work with those guys still, and President Trump. And he is here today to talk through all these historic issues which relate to the importance of the Bible, of God, of historic accuracy, the accuracy of issues and things that actually impact on our view of the world. In other words, I think he's focused on the truth, which I think we all are. So Lord Black, thank you for joining us on The Hard Truth today.
Thank you for having me.
So I said in the pre-interview, I'm a big fan of Canada, at least maybe the old Canada. I spent some time up there recently. My son wanted to go up and visit. We went to Toronto, and we also went to Quebec, up to Montreal. And I like Montreal because it was like France without the French. So it was quite enjoyable, by the way. And
they're nice cities.
They are. So, but to your point, I mean, I've noticed that within the context of our two countries, the governance of both countries have been degraded. And I would argue much of that degradation has come because many of our leaders have lost any moral center. That is to say that if you don't have a center of beliefs that are based on, I believe, God-given, God-directed, God-orchestrated, precepts that are necessary for, I believe, the good order and discipline to do those things that are necessary to sustain people, to enrich people, to get people to be productive and effective, that you basically have this chaos we're seeing now. And I know you guys have seen the chaos. We've seen the chaos. And I think it comes because we've lost our moral center. Is that something that you would agree or disagree with?
I think I would agree with it in part. The two countries are distinguishable. We have very little violence up here, and I'm not saying that in a pompous or condescending way. We don't have the tradition of a revolution where your country was founded by people taking their muskets off the wall and going out and making war with the governing authority.
Yes, sir.
We had a different tradition here. So we don't have that tradition of self-help by recourse to firearms, and the practically unlimited right of honest citizens to bear arms doesn't exist here. And I have no objection to it, by the way. I think honest citizens should have a right to have guns if they want them. And we don't have the legacy of slavery. All the people who came here, I'm leaving out the native people now, the indigenous, all those who came here voluntarily, so they can't claim they were transported here against their will. And slavery was abolished in the British Empire in 1832, but it had practically been abolished here. And when the French were defeated by the English, and the English took over what is now Canada, there were only about 60 slaves in the country, and they had a mechanism under the French rules to work their way out of slavery. and it was abolished in English Canada in 1791. So we just didn't. I'm not saying this righteously. There was never an economic reason for them in Canada. You know, we don't have tropical crops like cotton, so there was no need economically for slaves, so we never had it. So we have a simpler sociology and a less complicated history in that regard. But I essentially, I think, yes, I do agree with you. Now, let me be clear.
Yes, please.
I myself am a practicing Christian, but it is none of my business what anyone else's religiosity is.
Oh, I'm with you.
But where I do, I think, agree entirely with you is this: that if we have a society that has formally expelled and tried to exterminate and ridicules any thought of any spiritual forces, any divine intelligence, anything except the material world we all indisputably know and is tangible and visible to us. If we do that, we are creating a vacuum in the human mind and in society that ultimately is going to be filled by sinister people, and on a worst case, depending on the state of vulnerability of the society in question, horrible pagan monsters like Hitler and Stalin. And if you look at the great parades that Stalin put on, the tremendous festivals of the Nazi party under Hitler, they were pagan festivals. They were clearly a substitute for the divine and the fabulous. And the result is too notorious for us to labor it here. The result was in the death of millions and millions of innocent people. And so as a practical matter, as well as a logical matter, we need the retention of a respect for the idea of spiritual forces. And incidentally, the greatest act of faith of all, and the most misplaced one, is atheism. If you focus on banishing any thought of any higher or other power or authority, it takes a much greater and less justifiable, logically justifiable act of faith than a reasonable, moderate practice of a faith.
So I often tell people I'm a druid, just to get them to recognize that it's necessary to have freedom of thought. And by the way, the idea of sky-clad ceremonies with naked women is not a bad idea, but I digress. But regarding that, I too believe deeply in God. I would not. I've done a lot of dangerous things my entire life as an intelligence operative, and I'm happy to still be here in one piece and talking. So with that said, and by the way, I appreciate your framing the differences between our two countries the way you did. I actually live, I'm in North Carolina this very minute. I live on an old plantation. I'm looking out right now across the field. I can see the Albemarle Sound, and between the Sound and me is a field that has been producing cotton since probably the 1850s. The Edenton, North Carolina is one of the oldest towns in North Carolina. And yeah, the nation, the southern nation, the southern part of the United States depended on labor for its economic benefits. And that was something that had to be changed. My colleagues and I get into the issues and discussions regarding the Civil War. And I do believe that the Civil War was necessary, unfortunately. Maybe I'm a minority, but I do believe it was necessary. And I'm one of those down here. I'm transplanted down here. And a lot of folks who were formerly Democrats have become Republicans and recognize the need to basically integrate those back into society. One of the things that we've had a hard time with, to your point, is that there's still a isolation of the Black community here, which is kind of, it baffles a lot of us, because it's kind of like, hey, we really want everybody to benefit from the benefits of the U.S. economy and the ability to essentially generate your own fortune, your future. And it's a very difficult mindset to break, that to get people to say we can guarantee you freedom of opportunity. We cannot guarantee you freedom of outcome. And it seems to me, Lord Black, that so much of what the left does is they try, and you brought up Stalin, you brought up Hitler. A lot of those folks want to guarantee outcome. They don't want to guarantee opportunity. Opportunity is dangerous. That means people are going to be going out there and doing things which are not necessarily easily controllable. But so much of what the left wants to do is try to promote the idea that we will help give you an outcome that you want. And ultimately, The outcome of the Soviet Union was tragic. Bread lines, the whole utopianism of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi dream, the nationalistic dream. These things all, to your point, I believe, take the place of spirituality and the ideas of basically having the freedom to chart your own way and try to be everything you can be. So that's a long way of asking my next question. But do you believe then, by the fact that you have these forces today which have become agents of chaos, they become agents of paganism? I would argue the whole green movement is their replacement for God. They become so focused on CO2, which is a plant food, as a derivative of religion, of their religion. So do you think that maybe a lot of these things that we're seeing right now is taking the place of God within the context of the left?
I think indirectly. In the case of the green movement, our foes in the Cold War showed a talent at improvisation that I certainly would never have suspected that they possessed. And when the West won the greatest and most bloodless strategic victory in the history of the world in the Cold War, and the Soviet Union disintegrated without a shot being fired,
right,
and international communism collapsed, with astounding spontaneity, the defeated international left crowded onto the environmental bandwagon, which at that time was populated only by authentic conservationists. Now, some of them, like Greenpeace, were often very tiresome. They'd harass American aircraft carriers when they came to make a goodwill visit in a foreign port and things like this, and badgered the French nuclear tests in the South Pacific until the French sunk the Greenpeace warrior in New Zealand. But they crowded onto this bandwagon and attacked capitalism from a new direction, claiming to be protecting the planet. And I must say, they caught us absolutely off guard. It was an ideological equivalent of Pearl Harbor or something, And it took the longest time for the forces of good sense to start to respond and say, look here, we can't impoverish our societies because of a totally unproven theory that otherwise we're all going to drown, even in the low country of North Carolina, according to the former Prince of Wales, now His Majesty the King, or your former Vice President Al Gore, who at least made a lot of money out of it. You're supposed to be swimming there in the littoral of North Carolina. You were for the last 10 years, and they've kept this balloon in the air for a long time. But I think to some extent you're quite right and perceptive in saying there's a transposition. Instead of worship, we will at least worship the environment, the world we know, without getting into what the creation of it was like or how it happened. But I also think there is the tactical contemporary ingredient of the defeated left, the debunked Marxists, scrambling onto this bus when it happened to stop right in front of them, and taking over the steering wheel, putting their foot to the floor over the accelerator and saying, get on board, because otherwise, if you continue with your capitalist ways, the world's coming to an end. Now, how we were dumb enough to buy into that is another issue. And we're still just starting to, come out from under it and say, look here, this is rubbish. We don't know this and we're not doing it. But it's taken a direct hit to the economic well-being of the masses of the Western world before we got there. Now you have these demonstrations all over Europe and North America saying, the hell with this. We'll take our chances with a warming, 50 years from now in the world. But we're not interested in going bankrupt now, thank you, and having our homes repossessed and so forth. So we're starting at least.
So we're talking with Lord Conrad Black, the author of Political and Strategic History of the World, Part 1. We're having a good conversation about some of the root issues and causes of the chaos we're seeing. So this may surprise you, Lord Black, but I actually got a degree in environmental studies back in 1986 as part of my undergrad.
And better that than gender studies, but you can't make a living out of it.
Yeah, but that's the point. It's like that I was taught weather. One of the things we were taught the clear distinction between weather and climate. we were actually taught as one of our finals how to do weather forecasting, and weather forecasting is separate and distinct from climate. Does weather impact on climate? Absolutely, but you can't actually measure climate without looking at it at 10 to 15 to 20,000 year blocks of time. You have to look at geologic time to understand it. And secondly, the idea that nuclear was bad was like, no, nuclear is good. One of my finals for the degree was to draw from memory without any books. It was not an open book test. You had to draw from memory and diagram a nuclear power plant from memory. That was a requirement for the degree. So my point to you, sir, is I got the degree back when it was a degree in actual environmental issues. You actually had to study the environment, understand power, energy, weather, climate. It was all scientifically, before it became essentially an extension of the political left, to your point, where they, basically took and bastardized all this for purposes of trying to use it as I would argue, their replacement of a religion, because they now worship at the altar of green. And by the way, the youth today, have been propagandized to believe that somehow, and one of these congresswomen, you may have heard of her, the Miss Ocasio-Cortez, that the world's going to end in 12 years. It's like, no, not nowhere near. But yet they tell these kids, they convince these kids that we, the older generations who actually have an understanding of this, are somehow trying to lie to them because we want to actually destroy the world. And it is really horrific, I believe, to see such a diminution of objective thought, and in place of it, put this emotional, Greta Thunberg technically has a bigger audience and voice than I do, even though I've got a degree and she's a high school dropout. That's how crazy it is. I mean,
no, it's absurd. Of course, it's absurd. Ocasio-Cortez, look, frankly, is rather an attractive woman and politically quite a saleable candidate, I guess. But she just spouts rubbish. I mean, it's just rubbish. Yeah. She thinks we all have to give up eating meat in order to spare the environment the flatulence of cows, and what we lose in increased heating costs to heating our homes or operating our automobiles, we'll make up, she said, in funeral expenses, as if she's promising immortality to everybody. Yeah. I mean, as I say, it's nonsense. It's just nonsense. But the history of the world is replete with outbursts of nonsense, and we just have to rise above it, Well, fortunately, the economic interest of the great majority of the people is starting to weigh heavily against this myth making.
So that's why I wanted to go to your book. So this was a long way to getting to your book. So, the political strategy, the political and strategic history of the world. So my degree is in political science and environmental studies. So I'm a big student of this. Now, I got to be honest with you. I did not study a lot of these to the level of your book. I was primarily focused on American politics, and essentially it was during the Cold War.
I'll get to that. That's volume 3.
That's volume 2. But so let's talk about volume 1. So one of the things, obviously, you go through, you talk about the Bible's ties to history and some of the Homeric and Trojan Wars. So what are the couple of things you want to highlight or you want to talk about that people would find in your book if when they read it regarding these issues and the ties to the Bible, for example?
Well, look, I do my best to distinguish between folklore and reliable history.
Right.
And when you get to the Old Testament, you have elements of both, and I do my best to make the distinction, and where appropriate, I caution that in taking this literally, that should be done. That should be done cautiously. But there are a lot of elements of evidence that some of the factors famous in the Old Testament had a basis in fact. For example, it's been reasonably well established that at the time of the departure of the Jews from Egypt, the water levels were unusually low in the Red Sea, so that might have assisted them in wading across part of it, instead of just walking on the water. And there is no doubt, for example, that that they made the very intelligent strategic move of moving straight east and then north and then returning to the promised land from the east, a direction that was not anticipated. It was it was like the German invasion of France in 1940. It was a sort of a very clever move of ending up attacking from the rear, but it wasn't. That was in that way that they cautiously repossessed what was to them the promised land.
Right.
I have to deal with with history that's reliable, and
Right.
so as I say, I make that demarcation as best one can.
Yeah.
But on the larger point of the role of religious thinking or theological thinking in the human mind, that has always been there. And from the earliest times, there was this tension between the chief theological person in any clan or tribe or form of government, and in the Old Testament, generally known as the high priest, and the secular leader. Now,
Yeah.
there were attempts by both to combine the positions. The Jewish faith held that from time to time, Yahweh, Jehovah, entered and possessed the mind of the king to give him supernatural guidance. And one of the great problems of King Saul, the founder of the kingdom of Israel, was that he was accused of taking the wisdom of the Almighty for his own talent and abusively expanding his authority in respect of it. So
Right.
The point is made early on that there is this place in the human mind that requires to know as much as can be known about how the world originated and what supernatural forces influence the world and can be propitiated, you say, and
Yeah.
that continues to this day. So the relevance of the Old Testament is very high, and of course the particular contribution of the Jewish people and the principal reason for their historic influence far beyond their numbers, apart from the inordinate number of very talented people they've had, is that they were the pioneers of monotheism. And
Right.
in the early Roman Empire, the early Christian era, the Romans for a time thought the Christians were just a branch of the Jews. They didn't make any distinction. Of course, they didn't any more than Pontius Pilate did attach a great deal of significance to whatever might be unusual about Jesus. I mean, the Romans with Israel, they didn't want to govern it. What they wanted was someone like King Herod who would govern it in their interest, and they would leave one legion there to help maintain him in office if necessary. The Roman Empire was sort of in rings like a tree, and the inner parts they governed, but on their frontiers they wanted friendly states. They didn't have to be bothered governing, because they knew how onerous that was. But was governed by people friendly to them, whom they helped maintain themselves in power, and that was the case with Israel. And there was a very great pro-Roman tradition at times amongst the Jewish people. And for example, when Julius Caesar was assassinated, he had always been friendly to the Jews in Rome and in Israel. And he allowed the Jews to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and reestablish their own government. And when he died, the Jews came out in strength to his funeral and chanted the Kaddish at his funeral right after Mark Antony's famous speech. So there's a very long history of these things, and at times quite a sophisticated history.
So one of the things I can already tell I'd like to have you come back, because one of the parts of the Roman Empire, by the way, a guy named Joe Dunford, four-star general, fighting Joe Dunford, used to lecture me. Every time I got together, he would lecture me before we started our meeting on Roman army tactics. He was a deep historian on this. But one of the things I'd like to have you come back and talk about at some point, if you're comfortable with it, is the whole issue of Trajan being a leader from Spain. And the kind of, he was, from what I can tell, a fairly good leader. He was one of the better emperors.
Yeah,
and so I'd like to, because I think there were some great lessons from those times to include him and all that. unfortunately, we don't have time today to go through that. We'll have to start wrapping it up. But one last question regarding the origins of the concept that somehow the Jews are quote unquote occupiers. One of the notable features of your book and others indicates that the Jews have been in that region since before the Islam faith even existed. So I
More
don't
than
know how you feel about
1,000 years before it existed.
that's what I'm saying. So I find it obtuse and historically unsupportable that somehow the Israelis, the Jews are quote unquote occupiers of this land. So do you want to touch about really just about a minute left on that? Can you touch on that real quick?
Yeah, look, I have great sympathy for the Palestinians as castaway people who've been used as pawns by the Arab.
No doubt.
But they're descended from the Philistines, and they landed by sea, and they never governed anything there. They were always a minority, either in Phoenicia, Syria, Israel, Egypt, or in the Persian Empire, and then of course the Romans, and then ultimately the Ottomans, the British, and current times. But their claim is based entirely on the British promise in 1917 to create a Jewish homeland without compromising the rights of the Palestinians, Christian and Muslim. And the idea that the Israelis are occupiers is rubbish. They've been there longer than anyone, and as long as history goes backwards. And the Palestinians have their rights, but they could have exercised them any time in the last 25 years. But they will never have a state until they recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state.
Lord Black, I've been talking about this constantly in the media, and that's the fundamental hang-up right now at the time we're talking regarding the ceasefire and what comes after. Basically, the Israelis have said, until you can recognize us, we're just not into the ceasefire thing or a settlement.
Look, no one told Roosevelt to have a ceasefire 2 months after Pearl Harbor. No one told the Americans to have a ceasefire 2 months after 9/11. A war is a war. They started it, and they're going to pay for it.
Yeah. So no, I appreciate the clarity, the historic clarity, because I've been trying to say this as a knucklehead who talks on TV, and try to make this point over and over. And I appreciate your being here with us today. So Lord Black, our time is up. It's been fast because I know you got to go. You got a hard out here, and so what we'd like to do is invite you back. I'd like to have another discussion with you to promote your book, and I'd like to go through a little bit more about the Alexander the Great issues, because I think we're still learning lessons from Afghanistan. I mean that's one of the places that empires go to die. Alexander spent some time there, and I think some of the other issues.
And he had an Afghan wife too.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk more about that because I think he got it right. Other empires have not. And then also, I'd like to talk about Trajan and some of the other. I think there were several Roman emperors who were seen as the good emperors. And I'd like to kind of explore a little bit about that as well.
Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
From 98 to 180 AD. The five good emperors in a row.
Yeah, so I'd like to have you come back if you'd be willing to do that, because I really enjoyed our conversation today.
But for next time, you got to call me Conrad.
Conrad, yes, sir.
I'm a dual citizen, Canada and the UK, and my title, along with the correct fare, gets me on the public transit system anywhere in the world. Well, it's good for making a dinner reservation in London.
And we're both colonels, so you put two colonels together, you get Jiffy Pop, right? So
yeah,
there you go.
Full bird colonels.
So it's truly been a pleasure, Conrad, to speak to you today about your book. And again, it's reminding you all the political and strategic history of the world, Part 1 by Lord Conrad Black. Conrad, I sincerely hope people will come out and pick it up. I'm going to order this on Amazon so people will know. I'm going to actually read it, because I actually do need, and I do actually study history, so I can actually speak with some level of intelligence when I have to talk about these things publicly. So, Conrad, thank you for joining us in The Hard Truth, and we'll have you again, hopefully in the next few months if you're willing to come back.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tony. Nice speaking.
Thank you, sir. And so anyway, that's it for Part 1 of The Hard Truth. We'll be back with the rest of the team to talk about what we just talked about with Lord Black, with Conrad, and we'll be back right after these announcements. Hey, this is The Hard Truth, Tony Schaefer, Part 2. We're still powered by 6 Hour, Never Settle. I had a choice of what I carried in combat. I always carried the best. I recommend you carry the best. Never settle. And we are still on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network, also available on the America Out Loud Podcast Network. Check us out, Project Sentinel, projectsentinel.com.net. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm joined now for the part 2 of the show with the ever diamond shining and reflective Elizabeth Breckenkamp.
Wow, that's a really good description there.
And that's thank you. And then the rainbow-esque and always colorful Chris Cordani.
Vegetable rights and peace.
That's right. So it's been a long day. Yeah, Chris and I are like, it's been a long day. This is like, how many hours have we been talking today, Chris? I mean, this is
this has been talk radio week for us. So it's
I know it's like, man, oh man. So it's tough to be on your toes, so to speak. And so by the way, the audience, we had a special visit by Anthony Fauci this morning on our other radio show, right, Chris? He showed up,
yes,
and I was
yes. He looks like David Letterman.
He did.
I thought you were joking.
I know.
You really did.
Well, kind of. We kind of did. We kind of did. Yeah, I had to apologize because I said he was in his retirement. He was going to go around and do inspection of all the bedpans in all hospitals with a crack team. So I had to apologize for that. Yeah, I know. Crack team.
Oh my God. Good stuff.
Oh boy, that's right. The rim shot right there. That's
right. That's right. So, but no Fauci for you, Elizabeth. Sorry, no Fauci for you. So anyway, better than Fauci is Lord Conrad Black. We've been talking to him. First part of the show. I really enjoyed our conversation. He wrote the book, "The Political and Strategic History of the World," Part 1. Again, not as funny as Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, but I think much more effective and many more lessons to be drawn from, although there's lessons in both. And it was a good conversation. So I think a good place to start with our conversation for Part 2, Elizabeth, is your diamond-esque focus on one of the things you said regarding atheism. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So Lord Conrad Black had talked about faith in God, whatever kind of religion that you choose, and basically talking about the progressives, although I like to call them regressives, because really what they're pushing for does not progress human nature. It causes us to regress. They know that when they remove God from everything, or your faith, our natural human tendency is to replace it with something.
Right.
And that's why they're so united. The Democrats, the liberals, the mainstream media, they're all on board with pushing the green world, being green, worshiping the creation instead of worshiping the creator.
Right.
And Lord Conrad Black was, talking about the Bible history. And that's so true, because in the book of Romans, the very first chapter, it talks about that in detail and explains the consequences, very detailed. So if anybody is kind of confused about what that means, just Romans chapter 1, but it makes sense. And so that's what the AOC and what they're all pushing, the Green New Deal. Let's love Mother Earth, not the one who created it, but and so that's how they're able to push all this crap in school to start very young with the kids. And that's why they're so focused, like in libraries, how they want to put all of this very a lot of the without really having to go into too much detail, but a lot of the sexual brainwashing of, you feel like you're a boy, but you're a girl. Well, let's just go ahead and start cutting your stuff off, but don't tell your parents, and so that they push all that. They want you to feel like there is no real God. So it's a lot of it is really narcissistic too, I think. Yeah. I don't have to be an atheist.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris. I didn't mean to cut you off.
They think it's going to work perfectly and be hunky dory once you switch over to the other, let's say the other gender, if you will. And I'm saying the other gender. I'm not going to say you can't really have an operation to go to one of those other 59 or 73 genders, whatever.
It's like Baskin Robbins, only gender right?
There's so many genders. Which one do you choose? When you're 8 years old, it's like, Mommy, what am I? Well, last time I gave you a bath, you looked like a girl.
But here it is. You cut it off and you think everything's going to work perfectly. How did that work out for John Wayne Bobbitt? Okay.
Oh,
I lived near him at the time. Just saying, that was bad. Yeah. So, well, Chris, to this point now, one of the things that Lord Black said, that Conrad said, and Elizabeth, you can, I think, agree with this, is he talked about all the miracles that cannot be explained. And let me give you one of the most basics. I was talking to my son about this the other night. We're all familiar because we go to school. We all got degrees, right? I mean, we're all, And one of the things that's taught is the nature of matter. To your point, Elizabeth. So we basically, our body is made up of compounds. Chemical
Right.
compounds, bone, skin. It's all made of molecules. Molecules exist. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms then are made of really protons, neutrons, electrons. They talked about this in Oppenheimer, been nominated for a number of Academy Awards. Great movie, by the way. It's less upset because it's another movie of strong masculine figures. Like, yeah, Oppenheimer. Yeah, you had Groves and Oppenheimer, pretty strong guys. Told to do something, they did it. Yeah, it's really, really bad. But that's my point. So we'll get back off. I don't want to talk about Oppenheimer this minute, although it's a great movie. Go see it. The point is that atoms are made of mostly empty space, according to science. And that space is essentially, you have things, protons, neutrons, electrons, there's quarks now, subatomic particles, and they move around. And basically the theory, the belief is, I think it's true, that everything we have is mostly empty space, that all these things moving at the speed of light basically create the illusion of solidity, of matter.
Matter,
So, Elizabeth,
actual substance.
Where does the energy come from to drive electrons, neutrons, and protons? Where's it come from?
It comes from the creator.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Nobody can explain
a lot of science
how these things function at that level because there's no explanation. But they conveniently, it's all science. Like, okay, dude, how does gravity work? Well, we really don't know. Yeah, you don't.
When I was in nursing school, taking anatomy and physiology, we had to take apart the poor little things. We had dead cats, you had to cut them apart, but you're looking at everything. So you learn, all the matter. So when you look at the circulatory system, you go back to, what starts that? Well, it's the heart. What causes the heart to pump? The aorta, you go through all that. Well, what really sparks the whole thing? What really ignites the whole the life in the human body itself? It's the sinoatrial node within the heart. Let's just call it the SA node. What causes that to spark? Scientists who are of this earth, who don't believe in God, say, gosh, we can't figure it out. Well, it's God. Yeah. It's the creator. Yeah. It's the SA node in the heart. That's what sparks the electrical impulses that jumpstart the whole everything in your body that happens begins right there, the SA node.
And of course, that is mostly true of most people, except if you're John Kerry, there's a good picture of John Kerry, then it's the bolts. That's the bolts in your neck. So that's different, though. That's his bolts. Yeah. So just saying that, not in most cases, but I think he's not human. I mean, I don't want to be sued over this. So again, I'm theorizing. John, if you're listening, I'm theorizing you're not human. I'm not making it as a declarative statement. I'm saying it's probably true, right? So I can't get sued, right, Chris?
No, you probably can't get sued on this time. But
this time,
again, talking about these atheists, they talk about how they follow science because they want to sound smarter than they really are. If you ever go to a bar and let's say an atheist, a CrossFitter, and a vegan walk into it, you're all going to know in 2 minutes. That's it. They talk about themselves and how smart they are because they're a vegan or they're an atheist or maybe they're
vegan and atheist. And what's the third one?
CrossFitter. It's a vegan, atheist, and CrossFitter. They're all the same. They have to tell you who they are and what they are, so they can tell you how much better they are than you. That's it.
Yep. And they are. They'll tell you, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So to that point, I think many of the things that we take for granted regarding the world and how it operates, I think there's a divine influence that people don't strike that. I think we recognize it. I think the left continues to try to essentially, I don't know what the right word is. They can't eradicate it. Well, no, they can't really ignore it. It exists. These things exist. The faith in God and God's, the big issues regarding Jesus and all the other things. And there's several shows about Jesus and his time on earth. And Conrad was talking a little bit about that. And I think there's items of faith that cannot easily be disputed or ignored. So in place of that, to your point, Elizabeth, and Chris, maybe you can help talk about this a bit too,
Yeah.
is that they've now accepted some pagan-based belief system, which again, Druids are
It's still
cool
a belief
people,
system.
especially with the new dancing around fires. That's all good.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying
At
that
midnight.
at midnight, that's right.
They never
So
do it
there's
during the day,
elements
it's
of
always
good.
at night.
There's good things about that. But I'm saying that for the most part, then they've abandoned any belief in miracles. Chris, is that? I mean, how do you see that?
Well, let's put it this way: they may look. Their system of not believing is technically a belief system. Okay,
That's
Right.
true.
they're
Absolutely.
when
Absolutely.
when you're trying to when you're making fun of or you're trying to act superior to people who believe in a god yet or something they haven't seen, they're believing in something they haven't seen or believing against something they haven't seen. So
Right.
technically,
Mhm.
atheism itself is a religion. I mean, by
It is.
definition, that's what it is. So it's fun to tell them that. If one of them starts lording over somebody who's religious and talks about how they're so much smarter because they're atheists, you just say, well, that's the same thing. You're definitely a religion. So
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
and they have to worship something else. So they still find something to worship. They worship celebrity. They worship the
Right.
state. That's how it
Right.
goes.
So
They worship the
speaking of
earth.
that,
Yeah.
So shout out to Cherie Curry. Cherie does our bumper and theme music. God bless you, Cherie. We were together with Cherie this morning, not physically. We weren't, she's out on the coast, but Chris and I were talking to her this morning. And one of the things that she brought up is this event in Montana at the time of taping this. Montana has allowed for it. Even the governor, former Republican governor of Montana, spoke out saying, "Oh yeah, it's okay. These kids have to be taken from their houses if the parents won't allow them to be butchered." That's what it comes down to. And so the fact is that I cannot conceive of any situation short of the child being starved to death and abused that they should be removed from the house. Simply having parents saying, "Hey, you're 14. You need to wait and see what you believe, 8, 9, 10 years from now before you start cutting things off." And to me, that the lack of faith in God and the inability of having individuals, to include Republicans, because this dude's a Republican, this guy, this governor, the lack of moral clarity has permitted this aberration to exist. You guys agree with that or not? What do you think?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. And if I were a parent, someone actually really truly tried to come into my house, try to take my child, that's when that's why I engage the Second Amendment. Yeah.
That's what Cherie said this morning too. She said the exact same thing. Yeah. She said it had the same response.
And probably if it was really that bad, I'd move. I'd get the hell out of Montana.
Well, first off, let's put it this way. This is from Hillary's. This is straight from Hillary's book. It takes a pillage. Okay, I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? It takes a village. The idea is
I feel your pain, Chris.
Right. Her idea is the state raises your children. Remember, once you drop these kids off at school, okay, the state controls their lives. Now they think you're this is back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They think you're hitting the kid. The state will take care of it. That's a good thing, but that's where it's rooted from. Now all of a sudden, you're not giving your child gender affirming care because your daughter wants to play basketball and some rainbow flag waving teachers trying to get her to trans over, or some guy maybe dances or likes to tap dance, and then some other recruiter is trying to get him to switch genders, or at least think about cross-dressing in a way. That's ridiculous. Okay, it's absolutely ridiculous. But I can tell you one thing that's not ridiculous, Tony.
What's that?
That's Tony's takes.
Well, hold on a second. Chris, I did not have sex with that woman, Hillary Clinton. I mean, Monica Lewinsky. So, just for the record.
Neither one. Yeah.
Neither one. Well, no, he did have sex with Monica, according to credible sources.
I was just joking. Yeah. According to credible sources.
Oh, yes. We do have a few moments left in the show, and I want to get some of Tony's takes here, so let's hear it.
Yes, Chris.
First off, you took one of mine. And by the way, it is powered by Sig Sauer. Tony's Takes is powered by Sig Sauer. Never settle. And I'm going to have to settle only once because you did steal one of my Tony's Takes. Anyway.
I did? Wow, there's
I was
always a
gonna.
danger that since you guys don't tell me what they are. So there you go.
I know, I
That's
know. I
part
was
of the
going to ask
fun.
about the Montana thing, but I do have something for you.
All right.
Nancy Pelosi is trying to deflect the leftist pro-Hamas ceasefire demanding
She
protesters, right?
is.
Yeah,
Yes.
she's
Really?
because you know what? I'm telling you, this is her baby. I'll explain that. She's floated the idea of get this, Tony. It was Russian collusion
Russia, Russia, Russia.
with the
Oh yeah,
rabble
Marsha,
rousers.
Marsha, Marsha.
Yeah.
No, I'm believing she's trying to distance the Democrats from what they bred for decades with their policies and indoctrination
Mhm.
in a big election year. They own this. But what's your take?
So it's very clear, Chris, and ultimately I feel Nancy's pain. The idea that she has been cut off from the unlimited lifetime supply of Stolichny vodka is really having an effect.
Oh,
Bans go both ways, and so
withdrawal.
since she can't get to Stoli, she's heartbroken, and so everything looks like Russia when you can't get Stoli, right? I mean, let's face it. And by the way, I think I used to went back in my drinking age. I'm 32 years of sobriety. A shout out to Stoli. I used to love their spiced vodka. You put that in the freezer and you have a few shots. So I feel Nancy's pain. I do, and I think that's why
right.
she's so focused on Russia. And
Well,
by the way, Chris, a quick note on that. Did you know that she's a big supporter of naval intelligence?
Naval
sure. No,
intelligence.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because she basically looks down at her belly button and looks to lint and naval intelligence lint int. You can tell what she's worn for the
Oh,
past 5 years by the belly button lint in her belly
Uh,
button. Just saying,
wow.
just saying,
I
just
think
saying.
That's
it
very
took a little
clever.
while to hammer that one out.
Yeah.
So
Okay, what's the next
I
one?
don't know if the hammer is the right thing. Maybe tweezers, but
all
I
right.
don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to ask. I'm not
I
going to
don't-
ask what their favorite Peter, Paul, and Mary song was, but that's a different story for a different day. All right,
It is.
Oh,
I'm gonna be the odds maker here. I want to hear what you think about this. All right, there's a lot of yammering going on in the media about a potential running mate for Donald Trump because let's
Yes.
face it, he's going to win the primary. So I'm going to give you some odds.
Yep.
I want to know what you think about him. All right. Okay. Ron DeSantis is the running mate, 10-1. I say they're friends now. By the way, they're pals
hmm.
now.
Yeah. I think DeSantis will be great. The problem is he has to get rid of his line of polyester suits because he's a flame hazard otherwise. Other than that, he's got a pretty good shot.
Well, he's got to look. Trump has to look to 2028 too, as somebody who can.
He does. No,
run.
it could. No, I mean, I like. I'm kidding, Ron. If you're listening, I'm kidding. But Brian Griffin, our friend Brian, one of our distinguished fellows. Well, he'll return someday. He was his communications guy. So I love the DeSantis folks. But yeah, I think DeSantis is a bit stiff. I think the guy trying to give him that participation trophy. Sticking the Florida State Patrol on the guy was probably not the right answer. It's like, dude, just roll with the punches, have fun with it, So that wasn't his best moment, but
Okay. All right. I'm with you. And another one, I'm thinking now, Nikki Haley is probably going to be like a 99-1 if that happens, because she's going a little off the rails. She's been an establishment charmer, but I do have a female that might work.
Did you know that the Prince wrote a song about her? Don't say the lyrics. Whatever you do, don't say the lyrics. Don't say the lyrics. We'll get in trouble. Even here, we get in trouble.
But my dark horse, one of my dark horses is this one, Kristi Noem.
Yeah.
I like her.
She did a good. She became a little more well known during the pandemic. She opened up earlier and did a very good job. If you're looking for a female running mate, this might be the person you're looking for.
Look, I think it's a great idea. She looks a bit like Kimberly Guilfoyle too, so she'll fit right in. So I think it's good.
Does. Yeah.
That works for me.
Yeah. And I like Kimberly. Kimberly and I are friendly. So I'm just saying that anyone who basically has the ability to think for themselves, which she did, it's like, hey, this pandemic stuff, I'm going my own way. And she went through hell for that because obviously the powers that be, the deep state, and people even in Trump's own administration were, no, she's jeopardizing the lives of citizens. Like, no, she's not. She's doing what's best for her citizens and opening up. And I think we've done a number of shows where we talk about this. Yeah, she went the right direction early. And that's great.
Yep, and which I put her up. I was going to have her at 20-1, but I think she's a lot closer to that. She seems to fit she seems to be able to be the sort of anti-Trump on the female side. But there is an anti-Trump on the male side who I really think should be the nominee, for
Okay.
that reason. And he has nothing. I mean, it's very hard to get anything on this guy. And he was pretty polite and got some extra name recognition during the primary. It's Doug Burgum.
You brought him up to me before. Tell us about Doug, Chris, because I don't know anything about this guy.
I believe he was the North Dakota governor. He was very quiet.
Yeah.
He actually made some very good points during the first debate, under the
Yeah.
radar because the media didn't bother covering him.
So I don't want to ask a personal question, but does he like work with caterpillars by chance? I don't know how these things come up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for those listening, Chris has got a picture of Governor Burnham up, and it looks like he's got
Eugene Levy.
butterfly caterpillars hanging out over his eyes. So
Eugene Levy, that's a good one.
Eugene, I like Eugene Levy. I miss Second City TV.
Mhm.
Now, I will also ask you the question here.
Yeah.
The people keep throwing around Tucker Carlson.
Tucker.
That doesn't seem to make sense. It just doesn't make sense at all.
Do you want me to text him and ask? No, I won't. He won't answer.
No,
no.
Commentators should not be. I mean, look, he probably wouldn't be able to handle the demotion anyway. So we'll just put it that way.
So I think Tucker would be flattered by it, and I think Trump would even talk to him about it. But no, one of the notable features, and I've said this about a number of folks that went into the Trump administration who were personalities. I won't mention any names, but you can probably figure out who I'm talking about. They had no background in governance, no ability to understand the levers and mechanisms of governance, and their stay at the White House was pretty short because, frankly, you get in there. This is like being on the Titanic and said, "Oh, you're the guy in charge of the boilers now. Good luck with that." And you haven't even ever once even put a Navy uniform on. It's like, really? I'm in charge of this now? So I'd like to believe there was a lesson there for a number of folks. And I love Tucker. Tucker, I consider him. We're not friends, but we're associates. I don't think that would be a good idea. So,
but I do think he's a fantastic host, and he's very.
I could be wrong, but I get the impression that Vivek is hoping Trump will make him his VP.
Vivek,
or maybe not his VP, somewhere on his cabinet.
Well, Vivek, I put it 70-1 because he's too much like Trump. He's probably going to be in the cabinet. He's probably going to be very prominent. Then, of course, lying at 500-1 is Chris Christie, who apparently look. Let's put it this way. He is sort of an anti-Trump. He's very establishment, but you never know. Trump seems to find a way to bury the hatchet with people, and it will be a fun ticket to watch him and Chris Christie.
I heard that Weight Watchers was out to get Chris Christie. Maybe is that true? You think? I don't know. Could be.
It's possible.
Weight Watchers is going to sign on Chris Christie.
Well, he's the perfect experiment.
Yeah. I can see that.
As a matter of fact, and of course he may go the other way, and he may get that contract with Crisco and have those commercials where he's eating spoonfuls of Crisco, that butter flavored Crisco. That's good on the beach. That's good for suntans and eating. That's a twofer. Seriously, man, you sit on the Jersey shore with Crisco, a can of Crisco, and a hot sun. You'd be the man. You'd be the big man on campus, right, Chris?
I would say that. Yeah, that and maybe an ice cream cone too.
Well, that's Joe Biden.
So. Yes. Okay.
Well, I hate to say it, that time has come again, and it's gone fast. It's the end of another episode of The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer, and I've been joined, obviously, with the ever brilliant and always diamond-esque Elizabeth Breckenkamp, and the colorful rainbow-esque, and I would say almost a watercolor Chris Cordani. He's watercolor today because he's been under the weather, right?
Yeah. So right now it's more like finger paints.
His fingerprint, that's right. So, and by the way, don't eat the paste. Whatever they say in kindergarten, it's not good for you. Don't eat the paste. So anyway, we'll be back next week with another hard-hitting episode of The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. Until then, go out, buy 6 Hour. Be sure and check out Curry's music. Download her stuff, and we'll be back next week again for another show.